Hello and welcome to Books Up Close, the podcast. I'm Chris Lloyd, a writer and academic, and on this show I talk to other writers about their work and their practice. We also collaborate on a close reading of their writing, looking at a particular passage or a whole poem, and talk about its meanings, resonances, and the technicalities of language. This is a show for book nerds, aspiring and established authors, or anyone interested in how texts get made. In this episode, I talked to Richie Hofmann about his poem Breed Me. Richie's new book of poems, The Bronze Arms, is forthcoming from Alfred A. Knopf. He is also the author of 100 Lovers and Second Empire, and his poems appear in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, and Poetry. Okay, well, Richie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, I ask everybody this question to start with. How do you feel about close reading? Like, I know you're teaching, I know you're in classrooms, I know you're in workshops. How do you feel about it as an activity? And how do you feel about us close reading your work now, today?
Well, close reading is probably the most important thing to me. I spend part of every day doing it with my students and at home. I love it as an activity because I feel like it's endlessly rewarding. And no matter how much you can press up against a text, there's more to discover about it. I think doing it with other people is better than doing it by yourself. And that's why I love the seminars I get to teach, because even students who are encountering a poem for the very first time will show me things to know about it that I'd never discovered in years and years of reading it. Close reading my own work, that's something I do less often. But I'm not opposed to it because I've had this experience many times, and I'm sure you have as well, that the text you write knows more than you do. And what I had intended to produce as an effect in the text may or may not come across at the same time other things come across. So I don't feel precious about my intentions or my possession of the text at all.
I like hearing that. If only to show my students, be like, here, look, the poet said it's yours now.
Well, it's true. The poem belongs to other people once it's in the world. And, I can't go running around correcting everyone's interpretation. The beauty is that the text exfoliates and unfolds for different readers in different ways. And I feel like the meaning of the text, if there is one, is that collective accumulation.
Yeah. And we're gonna work through your poem today together. I'm gonna tell you what I see. You're gonna respond. Maybe you're gonna be like, "What? No," or, whatever.
I absolutely did not intend for this reading.
And I can just say, I don't care because I see it. Is there anything listeners might want to know before they hear you read the poem? Like, do you want to tell us anything about it? Or, I mean, we'll put a link to it in the notes anyway so people can read it along, but is there anything else you think they should know, or do we go straight in?
No, let's dive straight in. Breed me. My sweat soaked the sheets. You used to be like everyone else, but then the way you hurt me, fingers, teeth, I grew accustomed to it. Then I craved it. Then I got bored, and other men tried to put death into my mouth. Angelic Richie, with bite marks, in such a clean room. I deplore clutter, but I do like flowers. A tall drinking glass filled with peonies the color of underwear. I like hard and classical. The ceiling black like Caravaggio's wine. Through the blinds, obscure gods shined, making the outlines of my body a kind of emptiness. The ceiling fan pushed heat around, even though it was snowing outside. You forgave my love of surfaces. It's not a tragedy we couldn't have a child. I had a pain inside me, and I needed you to deepen it.
Amazing. Thank you. Again, I've said this to every single person. Like, it's so interesting hearing the author read their work, the tone, the inflections, the speed, the pace, all of these things. Where I always think that's fascinating. Maybe I'll do an episode one day where I just like I reread the poem and think the inflections differently. There's so much to say about this poem. We could talk about the title. However, this is a vaguely family friendly show, so like but we could talk about the kind of intensity of that title, I think. And I think the way that certain readers would perceive it, right? To certain people, it means something immediately. To others, maybe it wouldn't. And I wonder how you feel about that, like whether the title of the poem is a way in for some, like it's almost like a wink to certain readers, but not others, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I started this poem with the title. That doesn't always happen. But I was very interested in the intensity and vulgarity of it. But I also wanted to kind of push deeper, so to speak, and think about the kind of desires at the heart of such an utterance that I think have it's kind of become cliched or kind of memeified. It's just, like so many erotic utterances, it's just something one says going through the motions of some kind of encounter or fantasy or something. But I think I wanted to look deeper and think about what it meant to me.
Mm. And you said like whether it's like an encounter or a fantasy, and part of me reads the poem as like very grounded in the real and the specific. Like this is something you do in all your poems, right? They're highly grounded in textures and sense and feelings and sensations, but then they definitely drift into the realm of fantasy. And I wonder how much of it is. I'm not asking if it's real. I'm saying like, is it an imagined scenario for the speaker rather than this kind of specific? Because it traffics in certain images, and we'll come to those, like angelic with bite marks, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's filtered through memory. So
Yeah.
this, the poem has that additional layer of the past tense, which allows, I think, for maybe something a bit more analytical or reflective about the scene. I'm always trying in my poetry to capture intense, sensuous details as a way of kind of making the memories feel real, making them feel kind of present, even though they exist in memory. That's something I just value in poems. I'm always looking for that in my own work. And I feel like once I have that image, like one in this poem, for instance, was the color of underwear of the flowers. That, that kind of fixes the poem in a certain place for me and allows me to then kind of explore implications. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I have many questions about that. I don't want to get too off topic, but like that line, a tall drinking glass filled with peonies, the color of underwear, it's such the inverse of what we might expect, right? We might expect the underwear to be described as the color of flowers, right? Like you're really inverting what the reader is expecting in terms of comparison connection. And I think there's something kind of nice and exciting about that, but there's also something destabilizing to me that like things aren't quite where we expect them to be. And this poem does walk a balance between the thing that's desired and the thing that's like exceeds desire, right?
Yeah, and there's like kind of, I guess, I tried to set out in this poem to kind of toggle in some way back and forth between language of vulgarity and refinement. So I think, the destabilizing impulse of those images feels right to me. And that's of course how I think about desire, right? It informs every element of what we do as people, and every utterance of culture is infused with that longing. And I'm very interested in how language kind of takes us between real intimate everyday scenes and culturally important texts like Caravaggio, or like the beauty of flowers, or the angels in a baroque painting or something.
And you really, and I think you do this in quite a few of your poems. We begin in the very specific. My sweat soaked the sheets. Full stop. We're going to talk about the gaps between the lines in a minute because I have questions and thoughts. But that my sweat soaked the sheets. You've got the sibilance. You've got the softness, and it's very much the speaker in the present moment, or like, well, we don't know, right? We don't know where we are yet, but we're fully grounded on that bed. Is that often a way for you to kind of like get into a poem, that it needs that kind of grounding moment? Like, you could begin in a very different place, right? But
Yeah, I think the physicality grounds me. I think, I hadn't thought about this in terms of this poem, but I mean, a writer could start it in the second line and foreground the address, but my impulse was to kind of stay physical. I don't know, it's like I guess there's an awareness of the body, of bodily fluids, of the kind of porousness of the body, of the way that we kind of melt into the atmosphere right away, that I guess was important to me.
I also think something that you do that you do a lot is this real hard end with the full stop right at the end of the line. And poets, when we talk about poetry, we're used to thinking about the line as the unit, right, of measurement. And so often you end lines with those full stops. You don't do it as much later on through the poem, but you do in places that I'm like, ooh, and it feels so precise and kind of like, to me, like hard, even while you're describing often very soft things. And I wonder whether is that a tension you're interested in?
Oh, absolutely. I like hard and classical. I like
Yeah, yeah.
I like the intensity and completeness of a moment in a poem where the unit of the line and the unit of the sentence align and become one. And then part of the play of the poem as a piece of craft is that it then gets to kind of unravel through enjambment and come together. I mean, the lines that come next are really unraveling, where one kind of more complex sentence just kind of tumbles over. And I'm just thinking of the kind of rumpled bedding kind of coming undone as the relationships coming undone. And again, it's not like a reader is probably reading a poem and thinking of this exact relationship. Oh, look, the lines are unraveling while the relationship's unraveling. But I think a poet's able to kind of manipulate energy in a certain way that I hope a reader experiences in some ways, even if they might not be able to articulate it.
Yeah. Do you ever worry about that hard full stop at the end of a line? Do you ever go, do I want it? Do I not want it? Do you ever deliberate? Or is it clear to
Chris, I worry about everything. It's
you?
yeah, I mean, and the beauty and intensity and fun of being inside a poem is that these completely inconsequential decisions feel so important, and feel so essential. And in the kind of ecosystem of a poem, punctuation is massive. And so, no, I do worry about it. I'm always trying to create a push and pull in the poem. I want there to be some kind of seductive variation. I'm always looking in a poem that I'm close reading, by a writer who's not me, for a kind of established pattern. And then I'm very intrigued where it breaks. Usually that feels like a moment of great power for me as a reader. And because poems are such complex, interconnected documents, I find that where form changes, emotion changes. Where punctuation changes, the ideas change. Like it's hard to parse what are the ideas and feelings and architectures and sounds of a poem. To manipulate one element changes the whole atmosphere.
Right. And yeah, there is a lot of atmosphere here, right? We go from that very grounded, as we say, moment of the sweat and the sheets, and then new line, you used to be like everyone else, this sudden address to the you who feels in this early part, we're like, who is the you? And they very quickly become manifest, right? Like the way you hurt me, I grew accustomed to it, and you're like, okay, we're in a very real kind of you address. There are some poems that do the you, and it's kind of abstracted, right? But here we're like, oh, this is a very specific person. This is the poem is to them. But what I like about the line is that you used to be like everyone else. So the specificity of the you is actually your generalizability,
Yeah.
which I think is a really already I'm like, okay, we're in a weird territory.
Well, and I mean, it's one of the things that draws me to love poetry by others. It's just that they can feel so present and so intimate as if we're being spoken to, even though we are not the specific you. And I'm always thinking through this question as a reader, right? As a reader, am I the I of the poem? Am I the you of the poem? How am I both? How does it change throughout? And what a kind of intoxicating experience to be the I and the you at the same time. Poems allow that kind of cohabitational fantasy that Eros doesn't.
Yeah. And the kind of thing, I don't know whether you're a Leo Bassani fan, but like I had him in my mind, like reading this poem, especially given it's, breed me, try to put death into my mouth. And now you're talking about the I and the you and this kind of shattering, right? Of like the self and the I.
Yeah, and the kind of Baroque, the high contrast Baroque chiaroscuro kind of element. Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, I don't think I was intentionally invoking Bersani, but I think that those kinds of inquiries are all over this poem and so much of my work too.
I want to think about the kind of gaps between the lines, and I don't know if it's me or whether I'm seeing it more in contemporary poetry or I'm just noticing it more. I don't know if it's like where that's coming from, and where that you don't have to say where that decision making came from, but for me, that it really allows space into the lines. Right, it makes me think about each line, as we were saying, about its own individual unit, but also there's something kind of coming apart in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I think for me, like so many other decisions, it started as a craft problem. You know, I really do think of myself as a crafts person. I mean, it's fun to talk about Bersani, but I think of every problem I have in the poem as a technical problem to solve. And I think as I was starting to write the poems that'll be in, this poem will be in my next book, The Bronze Arms, that comes out next year. I wanted to transition away from the poems in A Hundred Lovers, which I had conceived as kind of dashed off diary entries. I was reading Guibert. I was thinking about the kind of fun play between permanence and kind of disposability of the poems. And I think I wanted to feel from a craft perspective that I was doing something completely different. And so I thought I wanted a kind of poetry that really reinstated the primacy of the line here, that like feel as little like prose as possible. Because even a lineated poem that has no stanzification, looks architecturally more or less like a prose paragraph. I wanted something that felt very alienating. I don't know. I was thinking of the stacked marble columns, and the way that when you're looking at these kind of tumbled columns from antiquity. They're made of these drums that are like perfectly lined up, but also one can kind of see the seams. That was kind of important. In the book, too, I started doing something I've never done before. I have capitalized the first word of every line as well, which I thought made it kind of seductively traditional, but also kind of underscores the kind of alienating experience of a lineated poem. And I like the way that they feel they take up more space than they would if they had been spaced properly, but also that they do feel like somewhat more fragile or somewhat more broken. I don't know, I was kind of thinking of monumentality and ruin and fragility kind of all at once. And in a very kind of basic way, I also wanted to challenge myself to make poems that were longer. To how can I sustain a kind of scene across more space of the page? And I think in some ways, the spaced out poems, they helped me participate in a fiction of poem that I was writing poems of greater length that I think was also allowing me to play with transition, with juxtaposition, with so I'm rambling now, but I think it starts out as a kind of personal craft challenge, and so much of my writing kind of comes from that. Okay, I feel like I've done this one thing, and I feel like I've done it well, and now I need to change.
Hmm. No, this is not rambling at all. I love this. Yeah, it gives me joy in so many ways.
I want to be experimental.
And I like coming to an author's work and they give you something that's like looks like what they've given you before, but then you start reading it like, is this the same? Is it different? And the turn of like within 2 lines, you used to be like everyone else, but then break. You're like, oh god, what? Like already, I feel more uncomfortable. The way you hurt me, parentheses, fingers, comma, teeth, end parentheses, colon. I don't know. You're not big on this kind of punctuation in your writing, and I think in any poem, you're like, wait, is this a change in tone? Is this a change in register? Like, the way you hurt me, you could describe that, right? But instead, in brackets, you just put these like body parts that stand in for, I don't know, they're so like metonymic, right, of so much. But that brackets, I was like, wait, what?
Oh, and they're both in there.
Yeah, like really crammed in. Like you feel the compression of that. Then colon, and you think maybe more of the violence is going to be explained, but it isn't. Instead, you explain something else. I grew accustomed to it. Break, then I craved it. Break, then I got bored. That anaphora is delightful. And other men tried to put death into my mouth. And you're like, okay, now we're in a new territory again. Like I think every line is making us take a breath, right? As the speaker moves us around this emotional dynamic that at first seems, I don't know, is it desired, is it not desired? And then actually you're pulling in these other people, and other men tried to put death into my mouth. I think there I gasped when I first read
This is exactly the impression I'm hoping for.
it.
Disorientation, fear, trepidation, surprise. I think as a writer, I'm trying to create that for myself in some sense. I mean, not in an indulgent way, but like how do I keep the interest going? And I think about, will I be writing poems in the years to come? Like I want to keep finding new ways of surprising myself, being more vulnerable, being more precise.
Yeah, and I think the precision here, like, tried to put death into my mouth, that is both like metaphor but also not right. Is it that line that I then start thinking, is this a poem not about, I hate the word about, that is invoking like HIV and AIDS, right? To me, like this firmly situates itself in a kind of queer poetic lineage, right? About, if it's called Breed Me, like what, like what kind of world are we in here about like barebacking? It made me think about Tim Dean's work. It made me think about like the potency of like the pleasures of death. And then you get angelic, so you're like, okay, we're definitely in this other world now. But instead, you get Angelic Richie with bite marks, which, if you ever write your memoir, that's the title, right? Angelic Richie with bite marks.
Well, I had never kind of invoked my own name in the poem. Something I wanted to, again, it was a way of being kind of experimental. And I wanted to, we're kind of in the afterlife now. It felt kind of epitaphic. It felt kind of Baroque, but also a little playful because I am so angelic as a person. And I like in this kind of sacred, profane cauldron here, I wanted it all to mix together.
Right. And it is a move from like try to put death into my mouth, which is so hard a line, right, to Angelic Richie. It kind of did make me smile as like it's like a moment of levity, even while it's quite serious, in such a clean room. Gorgeous line.
And a little creepy. This speaker is a real neat freak. And that's, I guess, another of the binaries in the poem is between like kind of dirt, the dirtiness and the kind of neoclassical perfection.
Yeah, and all of the inferences therein, right? Like the sexualized ones, like a clean room. Like you can't talk about cleanliness when you've just talked about certain kinds of like queer sex, right? All the associations of what like dirty or clean mean in terms of like infection and so on, like are immediately emerged.
Yeah.
Full stop or period for you. New line, I deplore clutter, but I do like flowers. That's like a real, to me, turn in the poem. I think for me, I don't know how you feel, but like for me, this is where the poem moves somewhere differently. It's not the Angelic Richie, it's this. It's like, let me tell you another thing that's related to all these other things,
Mhm.
but actually is in a slightly different world or in a slightly different register. And that for me is where I'm like, okay, actually, maybe this poem is about something else too.
Yeah, no, I think that feels accurate. And again, we're in the sentence and the line have kind of aligned, which I think signals a kind of shift as well. I don't know. I'm obsessed with sonnets. I've written so many. I mean, I've written so many of them. But I mean, that's I'm not unique in that. I think like there's very few people who've written one sonnet. Like once you start, you just can't stop, you know? And so I become obsessed with the way poems turn and swerve. And I think, you know, as I moved into this next book and I was having this fantasy of longer poems, I think another kind of craft question for me was like, how do I keep turning the poem inside of it? And of course, all poems do this, but I had become accustomed to a certain architecture that lended itself toward that swerve and you know, in these kinds of stacked, I think of these poems as stacked, in these stacked kind of poems, like how, you know, how can I execute a turn and still and sustain it without everything falling apart?
How do you know if you've stacked too many things
Yeah, that's the question.
or
And
not enough things?
yeah, that's right. That's right. Especially if you don't have the reliance on a receive form, like the 14 line requirement that you can just, you know, the other destabilizing thing about a longer poem like this is that you don't know when it's going to end. You can't see the whole thing at once, which is one of the things I love about sonnets is that you can experience its muscularity while also knowing exactly where you are in the whole thing. And in a longer poem you can't. And so that's another kind of challenge of stability and placement.
Right. And I just also love, like, I deplore clutter, but I do like flowers, as though flowers are clutter, right? When we're so used to thinking of flowers as like beauty, as like there's something natural thing, but to equate them with that feels really, there's like an edge to that line that I really appreciate.
I wanted to let a little more personality in.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're learning more about the speaker, right? Like we're definitely immersing ourselves in their world. A tall drinking glass filled with peonies, the color of underwear. I like hard and classical. Like we've got more of these like hard lines now, right? These individual statements and then sentences that are lines that are seemingly instructing us about the speaker's world, but are also because like I like hard and classical. The ceiling black like Caravaggio's wine. It's that kind of, you know, where it seems like someone is telling you something, but actually it seems like they're becoming more cryptic somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, it may be. I mean, I think I like the invocation of that kind of light and dark from Caravaggio's paintings, but also that it was wine, that the whole space is a kind of place of intoxication, but also of liquid. And again, I had never thought about like fluids, in this poem, but you know, we do get sweat and what's being put into the mouth and the drinking glass. Like there's all of these kinds of like liquid surfaces. I think everything is kind of, and that's maybe another form of unraveling, like becoming liquefaction. That's the word. Like liquefaction, of course, you know, an erotic encounter is an act of liquefaction in some sense, right? You become liquid in one another's hands.
And the and the poem does move that way, right? Like if you're describing that kind of like the flow of these very irregular line endings, right? Like some you've got two words per line, others you've got much longer lines. It's very fluid in its movement. It's less structured, as you were saying. What we also get in this little part is this little soundscape of wine, blinds, shined, outlines. A real little mini rhyming section that isn't kind of captured elsewhere, right? There are much softer kind of sound plays earlier on, and I wonder to myself, like, how does wine take us to shine to the outline, right? Like to me, that flow of thought of wine, shine, outline is and blinds is again a process of obscuring, right? Um, of the wine doing something to like seeing through something that's shining, but then the outline, you know, you drink wine, the outline becomes less clear, not clearer, right?
Yeah. But also like as the light is changing, like surfaces are becoming harder. in a way, like the body has an outline all of the sudden in what had presumably been a dark room. And the blinds, like, I don't know, like there's like, I guess I'm just thinking of that, those high contrasts, like it's either black or white, that kind of intensity. And I've said the word binary before, but of course, like the speaker's obsessed with high contrast surfaces.
Which is very film noir, right? Like the blinds, the light, the black and white. Like this is a noir movie, right? Like this opening scene of the body of
That's right. It's like the chalk outline around the dead body.
yeah, a kind of
Yeah.
emptiness, right? Like the body evacuated. Like that's exactly what that is.
Yeah. That feels true that just feels true to me.
Oh, it was
Just
also
lying
making
there.
me think of I don't know if you know the Alain Robbe novel Jealousy. And like he plays on like jalousie, right, in French, meaning like the blind, and like what's like just thinking like the blind that lets light in but also obscures, right? Like it's literally obscuring the view.
Yes. And then thinking about the relationship between that and the outlines of the body, right? What can get into the body? What penetrates us? What spills out of us? Right? Those, and we can't really be fully known or seen or understood in the process.
Exactly. And then the ceiling fan pushed heat around, even though it was snowing outside. So we're back in this kind of very grounded moment. I also like the fan pushing heat around, like swirling around us, like the poem is, right? Like the poem is circling this thing, which is the title, right? Which is Breed Me, which is this particular act or this particular invocation or request. So we're like, oh, we're back in the grounded world, great. And then you say, or then the speaker says, you forgave my love of surfaces. It's not a tragedy we couldn't have a child. And I was like, oh my God. The kind of directness, the very, like, it's shocking, those lines to me.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's like a coming to. It's like in the heat of the encounter, like you're just a dead body lying there, kind of drained and draining. And I don't know, I think there's a sense that the speaker is able to come to terms with himself. And there's like an increased clarity somehow when we look past the surfaces, when everything kind of melts, and what's left is just ultimately a failed encounter or an unproductive encounter that like has to exist, of course, outside of an economy of pregnancy and childbearing and all of that, but that maybe isn't tragic or isn't failed in the end, but no less free of pain.
And I really love how you return to that idea of like the breeding, right? That in this scenario is like, it's not a tragedy we couldn't have it. Like that this is a breeding that doesn't produce a child. But again, in that kind of queer framing of like AIDS and illness, right? The idea of the child, right? And the bug chasing and all that kind of stuff, right? Like there's a real double edgedness to that line that I find quite striking. And the surfaces too, right? I can't help but think like this is you talking about the poem, right? Like you forgave my love of surfaces, right? It's almost like you're saying to the reader, like, please let me have these aesthetic little play. Like let me play with aesthetics for like 5 minutes, please. Even while I'm telling you about this deep pain.
Yeah. Yeah, and do the aesthetics deepen or alleviate the pain? Like I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's a question that the whole book will contend with, which is just so filled with antiquity and art and thinking about the bodies and the recovery of bodies and the recovery of childhood, and how for so many of us a deep pain undergirds our love of beauty or our need for beautiful things.
Right. Like, and I needed you to deepen it. Like, we would expect, like, I had a pain inside me and I wanted you to get rid of it, right? Like, in a very, like, cheesy, cliche way, but actually, it's like, I want you to give me more of that or, like, to deepen it. And that feels like, but it also, as you said at the beginning, like, this is past tense, right? So, like, there does feel maybe there is an afterlife to this poem. Whether that's always the case with poems, right? They're very of a moment, but this almost tries to invoke or make us think that like that was in the past and maybe something else is happening now. I don't know. That's kind of one ambivalent thought I'm left with at the end.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think I even know. It exists in memory. But like all poems, there are just moments that reverberate out of it. And a poem only has to be convincing, I guess, for the duration of itself in a way, right? Like you don't get held to extreme scrutiny as a writer of a poem. It has to have that immediate effect. But then every now and then there's something that lingers and that touches other poems or that touches other experiences of your life. One of my friends described this as like a little pepper caught in the teeth, right? That there's like the meal has ended, but there's still this beautiful, mysterious evocation of it. And I guess I wish a little of that pepper into the teeth of all of my readers.
That's a beautiful place to transition, I think, to like you've mentioned a couple of times about writing, think about memory, think about like grounding. Like, do you have a conventional writing practice? Are you writing your poems in the same place? Do you have rituals? Do you have certain things around you? Is it always, are you writing by hand on your phone? Like,
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I wish I were more disciplined than I am. I will say I lead a very boring life. Like I like to, I'm not so wild,
that's not true.
but there are several rituals I really love. I love writing poems in bed. I have a line in another poem. I write poetry in bed and criticism in the bath. And that's just, people are like, wow, what a profound idea. And I'm like, no, like there's something about being in a bed, surrounded by books, surrounded by papers, that I just love. I can't do that all of the time because it's hard to live in a civilized modern way and to just be in bed all day writing poems. But for me, like that is the greatest pleasure. It's like just being in bed. There's like you're between waking and sleeping. Like you're awake, but you're not really in the world yet until you foolishly step out of bed. There's something like very special about that place for me. And I guess that's why so many of my poems take place in bed.
Right, and very liminal as well in that way, but in the between space. What's funny is that of how I don't know how many interviews I've done so far of this, 80% of people have said they write in bed. And I'm like, I guess we've been told it wrong this whole time. Don't get a desk, go and write in bed.
Write in bed. Yeah, there's something very special about it. But how many write in the bath?
No, I mean, I would worry that my laptop would fall in, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a danger. I set up a chair and put the laptop
Okay,
on top of it, and then I'm like half hanging out of the
yeah.
bath.
I wouldn't want water dripping on the keyboard. I don't know.
It's true. I mean, it's a humiliating experience, but
It's like living on the edge.
the work gets written, right?
Do you have early writing memories? Do you remember when you first thought, hey, this is the thing I can do or want to do or could do?
I think when I went to university and I started really falling in love with poetry, it kind of became clear that maybe this is something I wanted to do. But I never thought I could be a poet. I just didn't think that was a possible outcome. I wanted to be an English professor. I wanted to do close reading all of the time. That was the pleasure of both reading and writing for me. And it was also kind of humbling because, as a literary historian, you recognize that maybe 3 or 4 pieces of writing will exist, from a single century. And so, I think I still feel very humbled and that, that the course of my natural life will not be enough time to master any of this.
I, I love that. That's not what I was expecting you to say, but I like it. I know you obviously teach creative writing. Do you have any little exercises that listeners might try or want to try, or are there things you kind of share with your students that you think might be useful more broadly?
I mean, it's my passion, Chris. I'm obsessed with teaching because it's so fun to write, and then you get to do it with other people and watch them discovering their voice and who they are. In terms of an exercise, I've become really obsessed with how poems can kind of organize time. So one I recently gave to my young students that I thought was interesting was that they had to write a poem that was an autobiography of their entire life, in which they were born in line 1 and died in line 21. I liked that as a prompt. As general advice, I typically tell people to really let their personalities into their work. I think the darkest possible outcome of a creative writing class or workshop is that everyone writes in the same way. And I read for so many contests, and I hate seeing that everyone is producing the same kind of work and like copying off of the same person. And so I'm always telling students, the languages you grew up speaking, the music you listen to, the text that you love and uniquely amalgamate, like will give your work force and originality. So lean into that rather than run away from who you are and what you love.
Amazing. Do you have any good essays on writing that you would recommend? Or if not essays, books that, like on the practice or the craft? You love that word, seemingly. So
Is that a bad thing?
no, no. I just there are people who like love the word craft, and there are people who like I never want to say the word craft.
Well, it gives me the fiction that I'm like actually making something with tools, and like it keeps me from being an indulgent art. I'm not making art, I'm just an art, artisanal.
Yeah, right,
I don't
right.
know. I'm constantly looking for these kinds of books. I would say ultimately none are super satisfactory to me. My advice is usually to just find the poems or fiction or whatever it is that you're obsessed with and copy it and like try to get to the heart of what those writers are doing. Like I still feel this way that like being a teacher is just kind of an accident of time, that my real teachers are the poems that I'm obsessed with. And they might be very recent poems by my peers and, mentors who are my parents or grandparents' age, or very old things that are teaching me. Like I just got this translation of the poems of Du Bellay and Pierre Ronsard that I'm going to bring on vacation. I mean, who cares about those poets? But I know they're going to teach me something new that I can use. So I'm always, go find your teachers.
On that, before I ask you the last question, this new book that you mentioned a couple of times, like, are there poets like these teachers of yours that this book is in dialogue with? Like, are there poets that are like clearly ringing in the background when we pick up this book?
Well, I think I'm obsessed with Sappho. And I've been experimenting with writing really short, kind of pseudo fragmentary poems. And so she's absolutely in my head. I can't approach, I can barely approach her work. Like to even try to imitate Sappho is to turn to a pile of rubble oneself, but I think, she's someone, who I'm thinking about in a very kind of old way. Petrarch too. I'm never far from Petrarch and from his kind of the games he plays in his poem between their kinds of fictions of love and intimacy and their kind of obsession with architecture and surface. Those are two very old poets who I'm thinking about more than is healthy.
We love obsessions here, so
We're so obsessed, the two of us.
it's great. Okay, the final question is like, what are you recommending to listeners? New books, old books? Like, you've given us recommendations already, but is there something new or something coming out that you would recommend?
There's something new that I'm really loving making my way through. It's an anthology, and it's huge. So the New Yorker magazine is 100 years old, which is kind of a wild thing. And there, Kevin Young, the editor, the poetry editor there, has put together an enormous anthology called A Century of Poetry in the New Yorker. And it's so beautifully organized. It goes chronologically by decades, but then also has these interludes that are kind of informed by the time of the day, the dawn, going to work, the lunch break, after dinner drink. It's so kind of elegant, and the wealth of poetry inside of it is just phenomenal. And I've had a lot of fun discovering that some of the poems I just loved already, like Mirror by Sylvia Plath or James Merrill's The Broken Home, were, first published in this magazine. And just to see the range of it is really inspiring. And, I keep telling people like this, it'll take a century for me to read all of the poems. So if you're looking for something very generous as a text that will not be exhaustible, then I recommend checking out this anthology.
Amazing. We love this recommendation. And I mean, I don't know Kevin Young, but he sounds like the kind of generous person, right? He sounds lovely whenever I've seen him in interviews.
He's utterly brilliant. His poetry is incredible. He's a great editor. I was his assistant when I was 22, so I know him. I know him fairly well, but even knowing him and admiring him, it doesn't ever stop me from being astounded by the energy and generosity of the work he does in the world. So a highly recommended poet.
Great. And I'm going to link the episode of the poetry podcast that you did with him, where you talked about French novel, right? I think that's the poem you talked about.
Yes.
We will link that on the page because it's a really great episode. And I love that poem too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I love Henri Cole. Yeah. I talk about his poem Twilight.
Yeah. So many recommendations. Thank you, Richie. And thank you, for spending your time with me today. It's been a real pleasure.
No, it's been so fun. I hope I've said something useful.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a review and share with people you know. You can also follow the show and me on Instagram at Books Up Close and on YouTube. And if you can, please do fill out the feedback form linked in the show notes. It's really helpful to us. You can get show transcripts and more information by subscribing to the Substack. This show is made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the University of Hertfordshire and the Arts and Humanities Research Council.